Welcome to Torah Smash, the podcast for nerdy Jews, where our lives of Jewish learning collide with our love of nerd culture. In each episode, we discuss what we lovingly call a Torah Smash, which we have defined as a beautiful collision of one thing from the world of Judaism with another from nerd culture. I am RDY, and joining me today are
Barak Malkin,
Ethan Lane Miller,
Rabbi Eric Linder.
That's right, our guest for today's episode,
yeah.
Rabbi Eric Linder.
Hello.
Rabbi Linder is pleased to serve at Congregation Children of Israel in Athens, Georgia, where he resides with his wife and two young boys, who were named by an incredibly talented rabbi. Being raised...
Wait, they were named by you.
Oh, whoops. Being raised in Plantation, Florida, Eric developed a love for the Jewish community after becoming involved in his local youth group after being bribed $20. While singing, playing, and making friends at URJ Camp Coleman, he continued to nurture his interest in Judaism. He brings his passion of music, movies, and technology to the rabbinate, and he believes strongly that the Torah can be a vehicle for personal growth, as it calls each of us to Lech Lecha, venture courageously forward into our lives. Rabbi Linder has been into video games as he grew up with an Apple II and currently has an Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo Switch. While he is into general geek culture, he classifies himself both as a Star Wars geek and a Trekkie, is a huge Apple product guy, and is always looking forward to the next great app for productivity, automation, or workflow improvements. I also would like to say in full disclosure to our listeners that he is a close friend who I love dearly, and I'm very excited to have Eric on our podcast. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, David, and nice to meet the two of you, Ethan and Barak. And it's a joy to be joined with some fellow geeks this evening.
Yeah,
thank you for joining us.
Nice to have you. RDY has not mentioned you once.
Well, he thinks he's a close friend, so I wanted to keep up the ruse.
Okay. Wait, I have to ask, did you throw in that bribe $20 for me to have to edit out, or is that a true story?
No, it's absolutely true. So I'm the very long story short is I'm an only child. I grew up not wanting to kind of leave the house. Like I didn't want to go to camp. When my first summer at Coleman, I was in college as a counselor. Like wow. I never wanted to go. So the deal was, and I tell parents at my congregation this, I said, have your kid go once to one conclave. And if it's not for them, good enough. But try it once.
Cool. That's fun.
And it stuck.
This is one of the things that happens when we know we know one of our guests well enough that we can add things to the bio.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about how much you might have to edit of things that he shouldn't add to the bio. But
well, that's why sometimes he does that to just play games with me, so that I have to edit out that a rabbi was bribed in his youth.
Yes,
but apparently I don't enjoy that
by my very loving parents.
Yeah, very nice. Oh, it's from your parents.
To your parents.
I gotcha. That's very fun.
That's good.
And as far as nerd cred goes, Eric has the piece de resistance in that his younger child's middle name is Kalel.
Wow.
Which hopefully you have more than 3 listeners that know who that is.
Yeah. One of our early episodes we did a Superman episode. But that's pretty cool. I don't think I'd get my wife anywhere near something.
Well, so the reason is my wife's dad has always been into Superman, and he's considered like the Superman of their family, and so it was a way to honor him. And at first we were like playing around with it, and then it was like, no, it's cool, and it's Hebrew too, like voice of God. So yeah,
that's
or
awesome.
all God, Kalel.
Awesome. That's cool. So, Eric, thank you. Welcome today. And you are bringing the smash. So why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. So I'll start with the geek side. So as was mentioned, I'm a big gamer. And a game that came out a little more than 10 years ago has now seen a little bit of a revival because of an amazing HBO show. And that game is The Last of Us. Have any of you played it?
No, but I've seen the show.
I have. This is going to be super nerdy. Good thing I'm on this podcast. I've not played it myself, but I have watched a streamer do a playthrough of the original game.
Oh my
God.
I have not played nor seen, but I've only heard good things.
But one of the things that makes it such an incredible game is that would be enjoyable because it is, movie-like in that way with the narrative. And
Yes.
and this isn't going to be a detail by detail blow of the game. So for people who haven't watched it, or even if they could care less, I hope that this will still be interesting. So the basic premise of the game is there's kind of a zombie apocalypse, and it takes place in our world, very grounded in reality, and it's a tale of, and I don't want to give anything away, but it's a tale of a young girl and an older man who are kind of finding their way through this together, and it's really about their relationship as much as anything else.
You can feel free to this game has been out for 10 years.
Yeah, I can.
People,
TV show,
it's okay to spoil.
Yeah, even the TV show has been out long enough to spoil. We have a 2 weeks rule.
Oh, nice. Okay, I like that. In that case, don't mention any TV shows because I'm way behind on stuff. So fast forward to about a year ago, the show got greenlit for HBO, and the gaming community instantly was very excited because this is a mature video game with a mature story. And kind of the story in geek circles was that this was going to be the show to kind of legitimize a narrative from a video game, especially for a TV or a movie, in this case, a TV. So the Torah smash, I mean, how much of a hint do you want here? Or is that all you get before you guess?
I guess, give us a little bit of sort of the direction you're going of, is it the zombie side? Is it the TV show side? Like,
Perfect.
What is yeah.
So what I'm going to focus on today is really the comparison of both.
Oh, of the video game to the TV show.
Correct.
So what's the smash? What is a Jewish connection to video game becoming a TV show?
That's right.
Is it like something about adapting a work to fit a different audience?
Oh, Ethan, you're like on the cusp, man. That is number one guess right there.
Are we going to talk
Price is right. That's going to get like number two.
Are we going to talk about all the wonderful, like, the mitzvah speeches and the changes of the storytelling that happens? That's a terrible way to say that.
No, but give me more on that.
Is it like, when rabbis or people from the Bima reiterate a story that has happened in the Torah of the portion you're talking about, and then orally translate in your own experience to another group?
Also, you're playing with it.
Oh, I took the number 2 slot, Ethan.
Yeah, well,
no.
I think Ethan's. I'd have to give Ethan just a slight up on that, but that was good, Barak.
Yeah.
Does this have to do with Midrash?
No, not necessarily.
Is this adapting the Torah stories to movies?
It's not. But David, it's funny because it has to do with a conversation you and I had just a few weeks ago about a sermon. So if trivia was involved in the zombie apocalypse, Ethan and Barak might survive.
Yay.
So where I'm going with this is really the theme of the final book of the Torah, of Deuteronomy. And David, do you remember when we had this conversation?
Yeah, Mishnah Torah, yeah.
So Deuteronomy comes from a Greek word that means second telling. And one of the fascinating things about Deuteronomy, and for Jason, Deuteronomy is basically Moses giving his farewell speech. The Israelites are about to enter Israel. Moses is saying farewell, and then the Israelites go off to Israel without Moses, of course. And he is retelling the Israelites' history. But what he's retelling isn't exactly what happened the first time we see it. So in The Last of Us, for those who saw, I'm going to guess more people, it's possible more people saw the show at this point than have played the game. So the unbelievable episode 3, which people are calling, the greatest single episode of television. I mean, unbelievable, brought tears to everyone's eyes. It's about a relationship between these two guys, Bill and Frank, that find love amidst the horrors of this reality. That those two characters were in the game, but in an incredibly small amount to not even make anything of it. And so, in the game, the characters are going through to Bill's farm to get some supplies. Frank's already dead, and Bill kind of helps them. And that's it. It's a small part of the story. But in the TV show, it really blossomed these two characters. And I guess you could call that a midrash for sure. But it's also, sometimes you tell a story or I tell a story about something that happened and I embellish it. And then my wife or a friend is like, that's not really what happened. I was there, So that's kind of what I'm playing with.
Oh, nice.
And I just want to add to the fandom of this episode. It was tear-jerkingly beautiful and so brilliantly acted, and the little subtleties throughout the whole episode were just perfect. It was just amazing.
And both leads are up for Emmys, or were up for Emmys.
They both deserve, yeah.
I've seen clips of the video game and the TV show side by side. And I think it speaks a lot to the amount of work that went into the game, that what they had was what the show wanted, right? The level of production and writing and acting.
Oh, yeah.
Was almost shot for shot in the show, except for, I guess, these few pieces you're talking about.
And the detail that they put into the shots. So, one of the actors was interviewed talking about the brilliance of the production value. Mm-hmm. And she was talking about how she looked down on the ground in this one scene where they're in kind of a destroyed building. And she noticed these little black pellets, and she realized that they were fake rat droppings. So the level of production value that they're going to spend so much attention to detail that they're going to make rat droppings that no one is going to see except the actors.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah, everyone should see this show.
Yeah.
Even if you think you hate zombie, this is not like a zombie show. It's a human show. And the show,
like a zombie.
That's that's what I was told to say. Just repeating the words. And the head of the studio, which I'm losing my geek cred that it's going to come to me, is Israeli, Neil Druckmann, who's the showrunner and the creator of the game. The name of the studio will come to me.
Naughty Dog?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you go.
Thank you. One thing I talk to my congregation about a lot, because I just find this so fascinating. But my favorite example of this kind of thing, of kind of changing a story that happened in the past in the future, is in Deuteronomy when Moses, again, retells the 10 commandments. Mm-hmm. The fourth commandment, I've been on vacation for 2 weeks. The fourth commandment of Shabbat is totally different.
No, it's different by one word.
No, it's not. It's different by more.
Oh, Shabbat. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm going for sorry.
David, by the way, David copied all my papers in rabbinical school. So
that's why it took me 7 years old.
Oh my God.
So, if you ask most Jews or most religiously knowledgeable people of any religion, why is there Shabbat? The answer is because God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. That's kind of the standard answer. That's what it says in Exodus. But in the Deuteronomy version of the 10 Commandments, the reason for Shabbat is because God freed us from Egypt. The reason for doing it is completely different. And this is what goes back to what Ethan's guess was, is I think the reason for that is because that answer is a relevant, powerful answer for the audience that is currently hearing it, namely the Israelites that are about to go to Israel, because one generation earlier, they were freed from Egypt.
It's also Moses's answer, because in Exodus, it's God giving the 10 Commandments, and in Deuteronomy, it's Moses telling what happened when God gave the 10 Commandments. So Moses's memory of it is also based on his life experience of being freed from Egypt.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, that's interesting. So does that mean that in these given once, right? God had the commandments, told it once, it was because of 7 days, 6 days creation. And then Moses told it again is because he remembered it from Egypt. So can I say that the first reiteration of the Super Mario Brothers is the correct version, and then this new retelling animated version is a little skewed in some way?
which I still have not seen.
Oh,
Although my 3-year-old can now say, it's a me, a Mario. So I'm very proud of that.
Do you know what I found out recently? This is a huge tangent, but video game related. I don't know how true this is. That, right, he says, it's a me, Mario. In Japanese, it's a me means super. But
I just saw that, too.
The way it's said sounds Italian. So who is it? Because they're pretending to be an Italian plumber, or the vocal translation that we hear sounds Italian, but he's saying Super Mario in Japanese.
That's awesome.
Good.
Yeah, love it. Sorry. If we're talking about retellings, I wanted to name drop the Mario Brother movies.
I want to go back to the Exodus. I want to go back to the Exodus version because of creation, because just as much as leaving Egypt is Moses' experience of the world, creating the world is God's experience of the world.
That's good.
And Eric, finish the thought.
No, it was a totally new thought.
Oh, that's good, because mine's totally new too.
Oh, well, I was probably going to get lost in my syntax, so go ahead.
Great. Would you say, in your opinion, that the TV show is a faithful adaptation of the video game?
Yes, I would.
Okay. Have you played and then seen the Halo TV show?
Yes, and unfortunately, yes.
Okay. So, one of the things that was very interesting about the Halo TV show was that it was not faithful to the game. It was, I would say, loosely inspired by the events of the game. Clearly, obviously, in the Halo universe, there's a lot that was very familiar, but faithful is not one of the things I would use to describe that show. And so I'm curious where that comes into play when considering these sort of things. Thinking about the audience and the needs of the audience, my opinion would be that the Halo TV show could have been extremely faithful to the games and been phenomenal, similar to The Last of Us. And so I guess I'm curious what we think about that, what we're able to tease out of that.
Yeah, that's
have you seen and have you played Tomb Raider?
I'm like Googling movies based on video games. I'm like, well, Mortal Kombat, Rampage, Doom, like
Mortal Kombat.
Oh, Rampage, right.
Right. There's so many movies that are Uncharted that took the video game concept and like, this is Sonic.
Some of them.
The beginning of the video game Rampage, when you're using sign language, of course.
I mean, some of them is more about the IP than the actual narrative.
Yeah, no, of course.
I would argue that Halo's a better comparison in terms of like the video game, but also in terms of like these TV shows that came out relatively close together in the grand scheme of the universe.
And it had a high budget, and it was they wanted it to succeed heavily. Yeah, I think that's a great question, Ethan. And one of the things that makes me think about from the Jewish side, especially as a rabbi, and David and I talk about this all the time, is like the Torah portion doesn't always mean what I want it to mean, right? And like I could be giving a sermon on something, and a clergy can make, or really any educated person who studies text can kind of morph a text to be relevant to whatever topic they want to talk about. I think the trick is to be authentic to the text and at the same time to have kind of your own, and I'll use this word, intentionally, retelling of it so that it's yours, so to speak.
Yeah. Based on what I've seen from, clips of the TV show, it does feel like a retelling of the story. The Halo TV show is not a retelling. It is a new story.
And not a great one.
I think it also has to do with your feeling towards the source material. Whereas like with The Last of Us, as we were talking about, the people who created the TV show are the same people who created the video game. And they have this great love for the video game. And they brought in voice actors to play, usually different roles than they played in the video game, to have cameos in the TV show. And they have this real love for the source material that is just apparent in the TV show. And I think that that's the key difference, Ethan, between when you have a really good second telling and when you have a second telling that is just okay, or, it's really good, but it had nothing to do with.
And on the flip side, if it stays exactly true to the source material, in my opinion, that already happened once. You don't need to do it again. So
like
it's
the
like
Watchmen movie.
oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Oh.
So like when I listen to a cover of a song, I want it to be different. I don't want it to be a new band. That's why I love, one of the reasons I love Fish so much. Well, like when they do covers, it's their own thing.
I love like Me First and the Gimme Gimmes when they do their like punk covers of songs.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I would say that there's this, I forget the country artist's name who's doing a Tracy Chapman's Fast Car.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that was exactly my critique of this cover is he didn't change anything and add to the fact that he's a white guy who's taken a black woman's material, though Tracy Chapman has said she loves it. But perhaps the reason Tracy Chapman loves it is because he doesn't change a thing.
I think there's thing when other movies have taken video game material, often we get little afikomen of the game, right? When the Doom movie came out, all I wanted was that first person shooter through small hallways, and we get that because of some weird creative storytelling. We get like such a little in like the new Sonic movies or the Mario movie, right? There's little pieces that we see, even like the Resident Evil movies, right? You see the Umbrella Corporation logo and you're like, oh, and then there's some first person shoot action scenes for 5 minutes and you're like, this is just like the game. They're not. Once you see The Last of Us, you're like, no, this is just like the game. This is what the game is like. The other movies wanted this and they couldn't get it.
But there's also a difference in the way The Last of Us was done. Again, I haven't played the game, but I've heard it talked about enough that the way I understand it, the cut scenes in the game are a huge part of the game itself, maybe just as big as the actual gameplay.
Oh,
but there's others
absolutely.
That do, like Final Fantasy has huge cutscenes, Assassin's Creed has huge cutscenes, and those movies, no, not as good as the video games. Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting to me too, and why I chose The Last of Us, is because of the gap in time. In other words, what fascinates me about Deuteronomy is he's telling the history to a different audience. The audience that experienced all that was 40 years ago, or even when Moses kind of talks about creation, obviously no one was there for that. What interests me about Deuteronomy and why I find it so compelling, especially as a Reformed Jew, is this idea of making things meaningful and relevant to me now, to the 5-year-old kindergartner in my congregation, to the 90-year-old in my congregation. And they're going to hear those stories differently and relate them differently to their lives. And so to take one story and tell it 10 years ago through the medium of a video game and now do it through TV and to see the differences, I think it also shows with some of the things, especially regarding gender and sexual identity, which is a main theme in the game, are heightened in the TV show. And I think that's because that's where our society thankfully is now, that, wasn't necessarily when it came out.
I think the same thing is true about Purim than the book of Esther, and how we teach it so differently to our children than we do to our adults, and how we change it every year to reflect, like I don't know one person who's not going to do a Barbie Purim this year.
I don't think I'm going to.
Oh, you want me to explain Barbie to you so you could do it?
I'm doing Oppenheimer. He's got the atom bomb. He's got the atom bomb. Vashti will not bow. He's got the atom bomb.
Yeah, I think your spiel's going to bomb.
Everyone's going to split. The atom.
Please keep this for Oh man. There's something to be said about works that have been around for a while adapting to the needs of the current time. And I'm gonna lean in on your Star Trek cred and say, back in the 60s with the Cold War, the Federation was locked into a kind of similar Cold War with the Klingons. And when Next Generation came out in the late 80s, Cold War was cooling, off a lot more. And what happened? Well, Klingons suddenly became not enemies anymore, but they became allies of the Federation. And that was, it was kind of a big deal. You took the mortal enemies of the original Star Trek and completely flipped it around for the revival.
Nice.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, you can't, and again, this is where my perspective, not necessarily as a Reformed Jew, but just as a Jewish person that thinks that people, most likely men, wrote the Torah. Like, how could that not be a product of their time? Just as, Star Trek and Last of Us and any other piece of art is a product of time and place and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of people that aren't fans of the remakes. We'll say remakes, right? Whether it be video game to movie or video game to TV show or TV show to movie or whatever it is. I don't hate it all the time because they're able to add in the modern pieces, right? So we can talk. I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, right, the Mortal Kombat game, I was a huge fan. I was always at that at the arcades. The first movie came out. I loved that first movie. I was like, this is great. They're doing like a battle. They're working way up the line. This is just like the game. And then they redid it again. And granted, it was good. There was new technology they could do for their powers. They tried to focus a little more on the first game's storyline. I'm looking forward for when they do it again. Or there's plenty of movie like the Little Mermaid remakes, right? We got it originally. Disney's redoing almost all of their original cartoons as live action because they can now, as with CG, making these other characters more playful that you couldn't otherwise. And they're able to make changes that are more relevant for today, for audiences that wouldn't be watching the original versions.
I want to tease something out.
So I'm also curious as to which Mortal Kombat movie you're referring to. I'm assuming the 1995.
Yeah.
With Christopher Lambert.
Yes, that's the one.
And the fact that you say that's good just tells me how young you were in 1990.
And the sequel, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, I brought in some new characters that I was a big fan. Like Baraka showed up in the second one as named as Barak, and that was always my go-to character because I could play somebody with a very close version of my name. So like he showed up in the second with Reptile and a whole bunch of other people that you never thought you'd see. It was so intriguing at that time for us to see characters that only existed in the game. So that was very exciting. And now they can take the storyline and all the changes that people are making in other properties. I'm okay with it. I'm like the series of unfortunate events originally. I didn't like the original one with Jim Carrey as much. The Netflix series with Neil Patrick Harris, so good because they were able to really rely on the source material a lot more.
And that goes back to my point from earlier about the love of the source material makes for a better production.
Yeah. I want to tease something out a little bit.
Yeah.
So we talked about Star Trek and Star Trek The Next Generation, being an adaptation from the same medium, television show to television show. I wonder if things are different when the reboot or the retelling is in the same medium. So I think there's a little bit of grace provided going from video game to TV show or video game to movie, knowing that some things in first person shooters aren't necessarily gonna fully translate. I think part of what makes Mass Effect so great, for example, is the choices. And unless it's like a Netflix choose your own adventure TV show, that would be hard to translate. And something I'm thinking
of. So good.
I feel like that existed. Something like that existed.
Black Mirror did that.
That's right.
Yeah.
There was also the Colors show where you would watch.
Oh, I haven't watched that one yet. Yeah.
What I'm curious is in a few years, God willing, one of the things that's been announced that I'm very excited for is a remake of the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic video game, regarded as probably one of the most groundbreaking, great video games of all time. Like, it was phenomenal. And there was an announcement that came out that they were not just going to do like a HD remaster. They were going to redo the game, as in like modernize it, bring new story, new characters, new elements to it. And I don't know how I feel about that.
So this is a big thing in the video game world. So this just happened with Dead Space. I don't know if any of you know that game. Final Fantasy VII was recently redone in this aspect, where it's not just a question of fresh coat of paint. Like you said, let's modernize it. But, this character didn't work. Let's have new lines. Or, sometimes a joke or something will be said that is seen as inappropriate or racist or misogynist, whatever. And to me, that's what makes art so compelling, is that it's not necessarily timeless. And we can appreciate it for what it was or for when it was. But it reminds me of a quote, a good friend of mine, Rabbi Oren Hayon, who I know David knows. We were talking once in rabbinical school, and he's like, you know what? I'm not as smart as Rashi. Right? Rashi was like the first Torah commenter to kind of explain the Torah to people in, I want to say, the 15th century. But, I'm not as smart as Rashi, but I have one thing that Rashi doesn't have. Rashi. In other words, like the future, like the present that we get to build on all the art that came before us, even if it was flawed and mistaken and possibly offensive and all of that. And like that again, that's Deuteronomy.
That's what I say all the time, is like when we are standing on the shoulders of giants, as we say, where, yes, the Rashi and the Maimonides and the Halevi who came before us were these greats who were so much smarter than we were. But even when a little person stands on the shoulder of a giant, the little person sees farther. This is
so good. I
also want to say about treating source material with respect, and that makes for good entertainment, and how I have never, and I'm going to say never, I have never seen an adaptation of the biblical text into cinema that is good. And you can say what you want about the 10 Commandments. I'm going to stand by that. But, there were two big movies that came out while I was a rabbi in Miami. One was the Noah's Ark story with Russell Crowe, and the other was the Exodus story with Christian.
Oh, that one was horrible.
And I had exactly the same critique for both movies. The book is better.
You've seen the movie? Now read the book. So one thing I wanted to say about The Last of Us, I think, Barak, you were talking about this, or you mentioned something, like sometimes...
I'll take the credit if I wasn't.
Yeah. Sometimes the new adaptation is preferable because it's new and modern, whether it's a video game, a song, whatever. But sometimes it will take you back to discover the original.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
like I saw The Italian Job, with Charlize Theron, the one from, is that the 90s, 2000s, whatever that was?
Yeah, I think early 2000s.
And then that made me see the one from the 60s, right?
Yeah.
So there's that piece too. It may take you to go to the source material.
Which I think is actually probably the big reason why Disney is remaking all their classics, is because the kids don't watch the classics. So when they go to the parks, they're not going to know the references. So we better remake them so they can enjoy the parks and we don't have to update everything so much, right? I think part of it is that, but I think part of it is the ability to make these more modern changes of characters or phrasing or storylines that are more appropriate for kids to see today than the damsel always needs to be saved and the prince needs to kiss her to fall in love, right? Like that shouldn't be the case. That's not the message that I want my kids to see. But strong characters of every kind and side characters of every kind and storylines that are more challenging, I think are a little better for today's world. And that's why so regardless of the reason Disney's doing it, the effect is what makes me very happy about it.
Yeah. So you're saying the Dumbo ride is not as good as the movie?
No, I think the Dumbo ride is probably better.
I could tell you the haunted house ride is better than the movie, and I haven't even seen the haunted house movie.
The first haunted house movie was awful.
Yeah,
and it
which
really
is a shame. I hope Eddie Murphy makes at least a cameo or something. No, it's fine.
I mean, yeah. And I love Owen Wilson and
the cast looks great.
Danny DeVito.
Yeah. And it looks like a lot of fun, but I'm still anxious to see it because of what happened with the last movie.
Right. Well, we'll see. Right. As much as I think as a child loved the Super Mario Brothers movie, looking back, you go, that is weird. I get why not everybody liked it, but the new Mario Brothers movie I thought was really fun. I really enjoyed. They did a nice job when they went back and found new ways to tell those stories. So I'm hoping things like the Haunted Mansion, it doesn't always work, but sometimes it does.
I think that a big part of it is what Danny Fingeroth said a couple of episodes ago, where now that those old studio executives have died off, in his words, the new movie creators have the opportunity to use this source material that in the past they may have done just because they wanted to make a buck. Now they're doing it out of love for the material. We keep going back.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. I think that's spot on.
There was one other resonance for me in Deuteronomy that I wanted to mention, which is the reason that the Israelites aren't already in Egypt And it goes back to the story that's known as the 12 spies, which was, way earlier in the Torah, where God has a leader of each of the tribes go out and kind of scout out the land and then report back. And the majority of them, 10 of them, come back and they're scared and they don't want to do it. And they're one of the lines that's often quoted is like, we're like grasshoppers to them. They're like giants. And then only 2 of them are basically like, you know what, we can do this. God says we can do it. We'll be fine. Joshua and Caleb. And in the Exodus, that's an Exodus. It might be Numbers.
Yeah, Numbers 13.
So in the original story, when that happens, God doesn't really delve into the consequences for that. It just moves on to kind of the next thing. But here in Deuteronomy, God lingers on, and this is why the previous generation was punished and can't come to Israel. And again, I would say that completely makes sense for this audience, namely the people who are the progeny of that first generation. Like, they need to hear that. And so even though it's not what it says in Exodus, it is a retelling. And I would say, to go back to Ethan, what you talked about, it's a faithful retelling. It's just not necessarily an exact retelling.
And Deuteronomy is really good. And as compared to the rest of the source material, there are some differences, but I think both are good.
And you can't have one without the other. That's the other thing. They depend on one another.
How? I know how Deuteronomy depends on the rest, but how does the rest depend on Deuteronomy?
Because the idea of what you do has repercussions. The stories that we tell are going to be retold, not just to our kids, but generations from now, but they'll be told differently. And that's the whole thing of it.
Not hopefully better, right?
Not better than David's.
We try to do it better, but what we've been talking about this whole episode is how, try as we might, sometimes we don't do it better.
And that's definitely true.
And sometimes we get it right. And The Last of Us, they got it right.
Yeah.
And in Deuteronomy, they got it okay. I would say they got it right. And I think in things like when you say, well, my rabbi told me this, that's where sometimes we get it wrong, where we remember something and we are so correct in our memory, even if we may not be fully correct, which is why it's so important to know the material, the original material, to go back and watch the Italian Job from the 1960s and go back and read the text and engage with it.
I just hope nobody goes back and rewatches the classic sitcom Torah Smash, because this would completely derail any of their opinions that they had.
I thought you were going to say it's a waste of time to see the original Ocean's 11. For some reason, that thought, which it is.
That's true. The Ocean's 11 remake is way better.
But you're right. When I see a new movie that's based on a classic, I will want to go and watch the classic before I see the new one. Yeah. Almost every time.
Or sometimes even if it references it, even if it kind of uses it for an inspiration. So I think that, one of the things that I try and do as a rabbi is to make things relevant. And that's why things like this, in some ways, it's not just geek culture that's a Torah Smash, it's life. And I wish that more Jews realized how much in our lives, just going about the news, politics, our hobbies, whatever it is, how much can apply and does apply to Judaism. But this specific idea is something I think about a lot, about how do we retell something that happened before, whether it's a writing, sacred text like the Torah, a story that then becomes a midrash. I think it's a human nature to do that, but it's also, it's very Jewish. And again, as a Reformed Jew, that's what it means to reform, to take something and change it. So I appreciate being able to talk about that for a little bit.
No, that was awesome.
Thank you so much for reforming our podcast. Do you have anything
done.
As we close? Do you have anything that you'd like to shout out? Any projects you're working on? Anything going on in your life?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for asking. So, if anyone wants to check out my website, it's apropos of the podcast. I didn't just make the domain name before today. It's geekyrabbi.com. Although I don't think I've posted since Yom Kippur of last year. So that needs to change. So one thing that I'm proud of is our friend David here, I think 11 years ago, reached out to about 15 or so Jewish professionals to start a daily email that would go out to each of our congregations over the 29 days of Elul. So all in all, it's probably a few thousand people that get these
It was
daily
16
messages.
years ago. I invited you at 11.
Wow. Now we're going to have a post-show talk, David, why I wasn't there the other 5. And I'm also in a band here in Athens called Klezmer Local 42. We are a klezmer band, super fun. David has heard us because we played at my wedding. Those are some of the things that keep me busy and both in and out of trouble, I suppose. Oh, I do have one other thing. So I'd love to shout out my podcast, which is called Religion. So it's religion, but spelled with real, like REALIGION. And it's me and a good friend of mine, Pastor Joel Tolbert, who used to live here in Athens and has since moved to Maryland. And the idea of it is 2 clergy kind of keeping it real, like talking about, the groundedness of religion, how kind of like what we're talking about here about how it's everywhere. But focusing a lot on politics because of just kind of the way the world's been the last few years, but all sorts of stuff. So religion.
It's awesome. That was great. This was a super fun conversation. Cool.
Thank you for joining us. That was great.
Yeah,
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
I'll have to get, so it sounds Ethan and Barack, both of you are gamers. So we'll have to get some, it's always good to play with adults. And I mean, I never use a headset, like unless I know I'm talking to someone that I, know.
Oh, yeah. What's your favorite video game?
Oof, I don't know.
Miss Pac-Man.
It's one of them. I'm really loving Diablo 4.
Yeah.
But I like shooters, I like sports, I like RPGs. Witcher 3 is up there. What about you guys?
Oh man. I mean, it depends on genre and depends on mood.
Yeah.
I'm a big Zelda fan. So I'm working my way through Tears of the Kingdom right now. Waiting for that movie to come out. I'm waiting for a good Zelda movie. That's what I want. That TV show, that animated TV show was not justice.
Yeah.
Centipede.
David's really stuck in the...
Oh, I loved when I was in college. I was in a new dorm and they put a free arcade machine in the lobby in the back corner where nobody walked. And so nobody knew about it. I knew about it because I like to explore places. And it was a Galaga Miss Pac-Man.
Oh, was it like the anniversary?
Nice.
Yeah.
That combo set. And so every day
one.
I came back from my math class and went over and played Galaga for like an hour after, because nobody was there. It was the middle of the day. People were in class. And I just played almost every single day of college. I played Galaga for free.
I used to think I was good at Galaga, and then I played it in Eric's basement about 2 weeks ago, and I am not that anymore.
Oh no. You gotta let it take one of your ships, man. That's the whole trick.
Yeah. I couldn't even get that far. I didn't have any coming down.
Yeah. Yeah, happy to share gamer tags and get together online. That sounds awesome. Cool. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Torah Smash. Our fiscal sponsor is Jewish Creativity International. Our theme music was created by Sean Fogel. You can check out Sean's bands and studio work at www.thesleepywest.com. This episode was supported in part by Juice. Juice, which stands for the Jewish Comics Experience, is a full-day convention and preview night that brings together fans, creators, and industry professionals to explore the rich history and contributions of diverse Jewish creators and content in the comics medium. Juice is created and hosted by the Center for Jewish History in New York City. If you're interested in attending or to learn more, visit juice.org. That's JEWCE.org. Also, visit the Center for Jewish History at cjh.org for new information on the institution and their partners, who are all involved in the upcoming exhibit, The Museum and Laboratory of the Jewish Comics Experience, opening in October 2023 at the Center for Jewish History. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find us and is an excellent way to support the podcast. We want to hear from you and continue today's nerdy discussion. Go to torahsmash.com to find where to connect with us online, purchase swag from our store, support us with a donation, find previous episodes, and more. And why is it that Moses and Pharaoh never played video games together? Because Moses wanted a Switch, but all Pharaoh had was a plague station.
I'm going to say to you, Barack, Eric and I are not just colleagues. We are very close friends, and we love each other dearly.
Define close friend.
I love him dearly, and I think we're going to give you a lot of fodder for post.
I'm going to hate this, aren't I?
You are.
I'm trying to get the pause so I can say the thing. Hey, it's going to be one of those shows, huh, David? David's texting me offline. You guys, this would be a much better podcast without him. Have you guys thought of that?